Alright, hello crafties, my name is Infinity and I'm here again with another tutorial. Today I'll be showing you all how to change colors in a project, and I think today I'll also be combining fastening off and weaving in your ends just because it kind of ties in with that as well. I know it's a little different from the agenda, but I feel that change is necessary. So today, in the changing colors, I'll be showing you how to change your colors at the end of projects and in the middle of a row, as you can see here in this little swatch that I have changed colors with every basic stitch from single crochets all the way up to treble crochets, which if you don't know how to do treble crochets, that will be covered in a later tutorial. Actually, I think it's the next tutorial on the list. If you check that out on the Ko-fi page, I did list an agenda of all the upcoming projects. You might also notice that my setup is a little different. My tripod came in and I'm loving it so far. So yeah, for today's tutorial, you're going to need a hook. Today I am using this size 7 USA or K if you're familiar with that term, but it's a 4.5 millimeter hook. And I'll also need my scissors or my snips, and of course my yarn, which today I think I'll be using the same color yarn as I have in these swatches. So yeah, so to start off this tutorial, we're just gonna do a slip knot, and I'm going to do a base chain or a foundation chain, whichever you'd like to call it. My string can be short, my tail can be short rather, and I'm just gonna chain maybe 10 or 11. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So what we're going to do is start off with the single crochet. So I'm going to do a row of singles, of course. This is more than likely in your project when you're changing colors, you'll have at least 1 or 2 rows. So just bear with me a little bit as I go through my base chain, putting in my single crochets. If you don't know any of these stitches at this point, you can go check out some of our earlier tutorials, or you can find another tutorial that will better suit your learning style. But yeah, so a lot of times changing colors, people freak out because it looks so complicated, or it sounds complicated rather, but it's really not. Just getting through here. And also in a later tutorial, we'll be going over gauge, which is super important. I'm using a hook that is smaller than the recommended gauge for this yarn, so it might take me a little bit longer, but it makes my stitches tighter, etc., etc., but we'll get to that in a later tutorial. So at the end of this row, you see that I have gone through halfway with my single crochet, and I do that because I'm going to show you the most seamless way to connect your colors. So I'm just going to get my other color here, which is my minty. It's my go-to colors for the tutorials. I'm just going to hook that yarn and pull through those 2 loops, basically. Okay, and then by connecting it at the end of the row here, I would just chain 1 to secure it, right? And then I'd turn my work and I'd continue on doing a row of single crochets in my second color. So give me a moment to do that. And it's funny, when you do these tutorials, you always end up with a bunch of swatches that you have no idea what to do with, so they just kind of become memorabilia in a way. Okay, and going into my last stitch again, I'm not going to finish that last single crochet, but instead, I need to cut my yarn, my red yarn, so I'm going to do that. so I can use it again on this other end. And again, I'm just gonna kind of make a loop with it between my thumb and my index finger here. And I am going to just put that loop on my hook and pull it through to complete that single crochet. And that begins a new row. And I'm going to just chain 1, chain 2. And I'm chaining 2 because now I'm going to show you how to join with half double crochets. Alright, so I have chained my 2 for my half double crochets. Now I'm going to turn my work, and what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go about it as normal. I'm going to yarn over and do my half double crochets. If you notice here, oops, let me unhook that, I'm not going into the base of this first stitch. This first stitch, once you get to like half double crochets, if you go into that first stitch, then you are going to end up expanding your project in a way that's going to make it V out. And again, that is super annoying. It's super frustrating. So make sure you keep that in mind. I'm yarning over, and I'm not going into this first stitch, but the second one. And I'm going to make my half double crochets all the way across until I get to that last stitch. So I'm just going to do that. Now when we get into the longer projects, I will probably start time-lapsing the videos, but for the sake of tutorial, I think it's better if we kind of go along together, more or less at the same pace. Feel free to pause the video to catch up, or, you know, take breaks or whatever. And just half doubling, half doubling. Also, if you guys have any questions, or if at any point my tutorials are unclear, feel free to let me know, nicely please, but let me know in the comments down below, or you can send me a message and be like, hey, you know, I didn't really get this thing, could you go over it more clearly, or, you know, I wouldn't even mind going live at one point. So at the end of this row, my last half double crochet, you'll notice I'm not finishing that off either. So what I am going to do is, again, get my other color, make that loop between my thumb and my index finger, and I'm going to put it on my hook, keeping my tension, pulling it through, completing that half double crochet. Alright, so now what we're going to do is chain 2. We're still working on the half double crochets. I find doing 2 rows of each is really helpful. I'm chaining 2. I'm turning my work, and again, not going into that base of that chain right there. I'm going into the second one, and I'm just gonna half double crochet, oops, all the way across. Now you might notice that there's a little space right here, but usually during long projects those kind of close together, and then it all depends on your tension and how you hold your yarn. So just gonna keep doing that all the way across. You want to be careful, like if you're using a hook that's not the right gauge, like I am right now, you might accidentally snag some of your yarn or leave out some loops, because like this yarn that I'm using is a 10 ply yarn, so the different ply, it'll start coming apart. And I'm almost there. And now, oops. Come on. Alright, now that I'm there, my last half double crochet, I'm not going to finish that one off either, but instead I'm going to snip my yarn to my red, and I am going to make that loop with my thumb and forefinger, and I'm going to complete my half double crochet just like that. So now we can move on to double crochets. 1, 2, 3. I've chained my 3. Now I'm turning my work, And now I'm still not going into this base of this chain 3, but the next stitch, the second stitch. So I'm yarning over, inserting my hook, and double crocheting all the way to the end. And this time we'll be joining the yarn just a wee bit differently, so just bear with me. Also forgive the background noise if you can hear that background noise. I do have a little brother who is quite loud, so yeah, bear with him. And bear with me too. And I also have a loud rest of the family here, so bear with me please. I appreciate your patience. Alright. And going into the top of this chain 3 here. You notice that in this one I am going to actually yarn over and pull through 2 of my stitches, but I'm still going to leave 2 loops on my hook. So I need to snip my yarn again, which I always forget to do until I need it. I'm going to make my loop again between my thumb and my index finger, and I am going to put that loop on my hook and pull through those last 2 to complete that double crochet. And now I can chain 3 again, 2, 3, and I'm going to yarn over, not going into the base, but the next one, and I am going to double crochet all the way until the end of this row. Alright, so I've reached the end of this row, and much like, let me bring this swatch back, much like this swatch, you know, I have gone back and forth. I'm not going to go into the treble crochets today, although I will say that you would connect them in a similar way to the double crochet. You know, in those last 2 loops you would connect your yarn just for that seamless effect. Now I am going to fasten off this current swatch, which is, I'll show you that real quick. Fastening off is just a fancy way of saying, okay, you reach the end, just chain 1 and you pull up that stitch really big and you cut your yarn and you cinch that closed, and now you fastened off. Now, let me snip that too. You fastened off. So now I'm going to go into a little bit about weaving in ends. There's more than one way of weaving in ends. One way saves you work at the end. So I'm going to just get out my yarn needle, one of my yarn needles out of my handy Altoid case, because that is what I use. So the traditional way of weaving in ends would be to just sew them in with a hook, with a needle, the old-fashioned way. I like to have a little bit of water by me for my tutorials to kind of make those ends neater so you can thread them. Or if you have a needle with a bigger eye, then yeah. And then me, I have my nails that kind of help me guide that through there. Okay, and once you finally get your yarn through your needle, all you do is like go down the top of that last stitch, you know, where your yarn is connected to, and I like to come out the bottom almost diagonally right here, and that kind of makes it clean. And you can determine which side is your front and which side is your back. This is my back side, so I'm going to turn it this way, and all I'm going to do is weave basically in and out of these loops down here, kind of like you would when you're just like hand sewing a hem or something. And you don't necessarily have to take it from side to side, but if that makes you comfortable, then you're free to do that. I might go in and out of it for a minute, and then I'll just put it underneath like all the stitches. And I have this cool little stuff. It's called Fray Check, or you could use like liquid stitch. That is also a huge help if you're paranoid about your project coming apart like I tend to be. You can use this stuff. My bottle is so old that well, it's not really old, but the letters have come off of it. I use it a lot, and I always have to keep extra bottles on my shelf just because. So what I'll do is just put a little dab, you know, a little dab will do you right there, and you can snip it off. And the shorter the stitch is, the less you'll see your actual weaving. But again, this is my backside, so if this was say a sweater or something, you wouldn't really be paying attention to that on the inside of a sweater. But if you're making a more outward project like a scarf, or scarf, for instance, then you might want to be a little more conscious about where you sew things in. So for the other strand that is the same color, I'm just gonna kind of do the same thing, weaving in and out, until I am comfortable with just weaving it under all the stitches, and just push that on through there. And again, you don't have to take it from end to end, so I'm going to show you right here that you can just snip it off. I mean, like, taper it down, snip it off, whatever. Some tutorials will like tell you that it won't wiggle out, but I have had like some of my earlier crochet work that were my personal projects, I've had them to kind of wiggle out a little bit, and I don't know if that was like skill thing or if it was just wear and tear, but this stuff will not come off unless you just peck at it, which nobody generally does, so you're good to go with that. And if you continue on to sew in your ends, you will have a neat little square, square, rectangle almost. I'm also very much a math person, so I tend to get technical with shapes and geometry and things like that, so bear with me. Today it's a square. Today it's a square. We don't care. It's Saturday. I'm just gonna weave in my ends, And some yarns are a little trickier than others, like even if they're the same brand. Like for all of my tutorials, I've been using Red Heart Super Saver, and even within that brand, you have yarns that are softer. Like this minty yarn is more pliable. This red yarn looks more rough, but they're both the same age. Like I bought them at the same time, but they just have different thicknesses and consistencies. So make sure if you're doing a project already that your yarns are kind of similar, so you don't have all the warping, or you have consistency in the texture and things like that. So now we are going to move on to how to weave in ends, and also how to connect yarn in the middle of projects, right? Woohoo! So now we're going to do a little bit more on connecting yarn, and we are going to do a little bit more on weaving ends. I love connecting yarn, and I'm not being sarcastic. I do a lot of projects, which you'll see probably at the end of the tutorial, where I have to constantly change yarn. I do a lot of big projects, so I have to connect the same color yarn, etc, etc. So I just want to make this a little bit easier for some people, because I know it's a struggle sometimes, especially when you're just starting out and you want to make your projects look as clean and as professional as you possibly can. So I'm just going to give you a few pointers, a few tips. I'm trying to decide. I think we're going to start off with, let's do double crochets. They're faster, right? So I'm yarning over, going into that third loop for my chain. Also, I don't want you guys to think that like when you do a base chain and you're doing double crochets, that it's always a thing where you have to go into the third chain from the hook. No, there's some tutorials that will have you going into the second chain or the first chain from your hook. So, you know, just keep that in mind. And every stitch can be taller or shorter than the standard, so I guess I should use canon. That's a term in art history that my professor would be proud of right now. So we're just gonna keep making these double crochets across this base chain. I'm not gonna be connecting it at the end like I just finished with our other friendly swatch, but I will be connecting in the middle of the row, because sometimes when you're working a project you run out of yarn in the middle of your row and it's like, oh no, apocalypse time. It's really no biggie. One pet peeve of mine, I guess, with yarn is if I am making a big project with a variegated yarn and it ends on one color, but the next skein begins with another color and it looks choppy in the middle. Nah, that's not my aesthetic, but it is for other people. So, you know, different strokes, different folks. So, gonna do a few stitches across row 2. Okay, and I'm gonna pull through 2. So, oh no, I'm gonna pretend I ran out of yarn. I can even cut this off just to pretend. I'm going to take my next strand, and the only reason I'm using such different colors is so you guys can see the difference. If you're using the same skeins of yarn, then of course you won't have this choppy cut off in the middle of your project. You'll have a nice smooth transition. But I'm going to again make that loop with my thumb and index finger, and I'm going to fix my tension with my loop on my hook in order to finish off that double crochet. And I'm just going to pull some strings here to make sure that it looks as neat as it possibly can. So this, I feel like, is the back of my project. So I'm going to get real specific here. When you're changing color and you don't want to have to weave these strings in later, like most of us, you're going to want to put the color of yarn that you're currently working with towards the front and your old yarn towards the back. Now, I figured this out on my own. I don't know if it was supposed to be obvious to most people in the beginning, but when you're weaving in your ends in the middle of a project, like so you don't have to go back later, you want the front of it to be as blended or as smooth as possible. So I'm going to do a few stitches. As you can see, I'm vigorously holding this gold string in the front and the tea leaf in the back. And I'm going to show you that doing this, it just makes the project look neater and more professional, actually, to me, because you don't see that green peeking through your stitches right here. But if I was to just like not care, if I were to not care and I just did it backwards, I'm going to show you that you would definitely see that problem. And I don't know, it doesn't bother some people, but it bothers me. So if you're kind of obsessive like I am about order, then you're like gonna appreciate this little tip. So yeah, see, like you can see that green between the stitches as opposed to these first ones where you cannot. So I just find it better to do it that way, but you can do it either way, and it just depends on the colors too, because sometimes the colors just mesh really well together and you will never really notice from a distance. And we're just gonna finish this row. I'm not gonna make this one super long. It's just a swatch. I don't anticipate making anything at this moment with these two colors. So I'm just going to chain one and pull up my yarn and cut it, cinch it closed. Now that will never come apart. That's the thing. So you heard me earlier talking about the Fray Check, which yes, it keeps your project in general from coming apart, but like as far as the ends coming apart, but as far as this part coming apart, that will never be, because you've tied it down basically. And so now, since I wove these in as I went along my project, I can essentially just cut these. I don't even need the Fray Check at this point for that part. And all I'm left with is this corner and this corner. And this is super important because, like, if you're making a sweater, if you've seen some of the garments that I've made on my Instagram, you will see that obviously that is a multi-skein project. So these strings right here are important to like sew in. So if you're making a sleeve or something, then you want to make sure you have a super long yarn tail in order to sew that together into one piece. That just makes it easier to me instead of having multiple strings. But in those cases, I would definitely use the Fray Check at the ends when I get done sewing. So I think that I have covered everything for today. I do thank you for tuning in with me, and I hope to see you guys again next week with a new tutorial. Thank you so much for tuning in. Happy making!